All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here. My name is ChrisCummings. I, for a long time, was a college pastor in Galveston, Texas, reaching Texas A&M University in Galveston. It is the smallest public school in the state of Texas. Less than 2,000 students enrolled. So led that ministry for about 7 years. My wife and I just moved from Galveston to Tucson, Arizona, to plant a new church near the University of Arizona in Tucson. And so that's what we're currently in the process of doing right now. Tucson, a little bit about Tucson. Tucson is the 16th most post-Christian city in the United States. It is the 12th most unchurched and de-churched city in the U.S. It is one of the most churchless cities in the U.S. We have one church for every 1,700 people. To put that in perspective, Dallas has one church for every 275 people. So unless every church in our city becomes a mega church by Sunday, we literally do not have the square footage to reach our city. And so our hope is to plant a church in the middle of the city, strategically next to the university, in order to multiply and plant more churches all across our city, so that one day, by the grace of God, we will see the city of Tucson saturated with gospel-proclaiming, Bible-believing churches. That's our hope. To do that, we have to learn how to multiply the gospel, okay? Which is why you are in this session, I'm hoping, okay? And so what I want to do today is I want to make sure to be able to give you guys just some practical things on what it looks like to really take your ministry from wherever it is now towards a culture of multiplication so that we can expand the glory of God, magnify the glory of God in a way that we probably never even would have dreamed to be possible, okay? Now, I'm assuming that because you're in this session, that you have a heart for multiplication. The biggest question probably is how on earth to do it, okay? And so here's what I want to do. I want to give you there's kind of three big umbrellas that we're going to talk through and kind of work our way through when it comes to helping craft and create a ministry that is centered on multiplication as a growth metric versus addition. Also, real quick, before we dive into this, does everybody understand what I'm meaning when I say addition versus multiplication? Nods? Okay, great. So real quick, just also with that, just in case, addition is really the idea of we're trying to grow our ministry. We're trying to add as many people to our ministry as possible and get our ministry as big as possible. Nothing wrong with that. Multiplication mentality is how are we raising up leaders? How are we multiplying influence and maybe sending the gospel into other pockets of campus or pockets of our cities that currently that no one's reaching, okay? Those are two very different mentalities. Both lead to growth, okay? One is going to lead to cities and campuses being saturated with the gospel, okay? And so what I want to do, three umbrellas when it comes to kind of multiplication mentality of ministry that we're going to walk through. They all start with C, because I'm a good pastor and a good Baptist, and they all have to start with the same letter, okay? So here they are: conviction, culture, and constructs, okay? Conviction, culture, and constructs. If you're going to lead your ministry from addition of how many more people can we have to multiplication for the glory of God, you have to have all three of those things: conviction, culture, constructs. Now, let me break those things down. That first one, conviction, here's what I mean by that. You have to have, if you don't already, and again, I'm assuming that you do because you're in this breakout, you have to have, you and whatever core leadership team you're a part of or a part of your group has to have a deep conviction that multiplication and making disciples who make disciples is not just, actually, can we close this door real quick? Because I'm going to get loud and, oh, Mitch already closed his door. Way to go, Mitch. He probably did that because he heard me. What you and your team has to have is a deep, deep, deep conviction that making and multiplying disciples is not just an option for the church, but that it is the game plan for the church. Okay? There's a big difference between seeing multiplication as an optional thing that we can maybe do. If we have the time, we can make disciples, versus it is the roadmap ahead for the church to take ground in this society. I'm going to argue that multiplication is not just a good strategy. I'm going to argue that it is God's chosen strategy for the church. Okay? I'm going to give you 3 reasons why. The first one is this. Why multiply? The first one is this. God commands it. Okay? He literally just commands it. The very first command that God gives humanity after God creates humanity is what? Be fruitful and multiply. It's not, don't touch that tree, okay? That comes later. The first command that God gives people after He creates them is to be fruitful and multiply. And the reason why is because they are image bearers of God, and God's ultimate mission is for His glory to cover this earth. That's God's ultimate mission. And in order for that mission to occur, humanity is to multiply so that there's more people reflecting the glory of God and then covering the earth with His glory. Okay? God's very first command to humanity, be fruitful and multiply. God's very first command to Noah after the flood subsided and he got off the ark was what? Be fruitful and multiply. When Jesus comes onto the scene, before He ascends back to the Father, He gives a command to His disciples. We call it the Great Commission. That Great Commission is to go and make disciples. But at the heart of it all is what? Be fruitful and multiply. Okay, here's the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 18 through 20. And Jesus said, and Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Okay? Here's what I want you to notice. 3 things about this passage that Jesus gives to His disciples. Okay? The first thing is this. There is one command in this Great Commission. A lot of times we see multiple commands that Jesus says here. He's like, okay, He says to go. He says to make disciples. We should baptize them. We should teach them. We see 4 or so commands. There's really only one command in the Greek text that Jesus gives here. Everything else is what's called a Greek participle. And what a Greek participle does is it helps define the main verb. There's one main verb. Everything else helps define the main verb. That one main verb is simply this: make disciples. That's what Jesus tells His people. Make disciples. Everything else defines what it means to make disciples. Which means that when Jesus gave us the Great Commission, here's what He did. He told us what we should be doing, make disciples. And in the same breath, He told us how we should do it. Okay? And how He told us to do it is this. The first thing He says is to make disciples, that you should first, to do that, you should go. That word go in the Greek should be translated more so to the idea of as you are going. Not go over there and make disciples. It's as you are going. As you are living your life. Wherever God is sending you along the path of life, as you go, you make disciples. You don't need to leave your context to go somewhere else. It's wherever God is sending you. Okay? And so He says, as you are going, so we make disciples as we're going in all of life. And then He says we make disciples by baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We baptize, that idea of baptism is really the first act of obedience to someone who has chosen to follow Jesus, right? And so we see this idea of baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit as this idea of evangelism. Right? That in order to make disciples, we need to make disciples everywhere that we go, as we are going. And part of making disciples means that we are leading people to faith in Jesus Christ. That we are evangelizing the lost, leading them to faith in Christ. And then He says to teach them all that I have taught you, all that you've observed, right? In order to teach them, this idea of what? Discipleship. Okay? So when we talk about disciple making, Making and multiplying disciples. We were talking about two things that work together. We like to say in our church that it's two sides of the same coin. Okay? One side is evangelism and the other side is discipleship. Disciple making involves both, and it has to involve both. Okay? Two sides of the same coin of disciple making is evangelism and discipleship. But notice here, okay, that whenever Jesus commands his disciples to teach them all that I have commanded you. In order to teach people all that Christ has commanded them, they have to teach them how to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all the commands. Because one of the commands that Jesus gave was to go make disciples, right? So here's the thing. The Great Commission does not say, go therefore and make converts. The Great Commission does say, go therefore and make disciples. And disciples are made fully whenever they are equipped and ready to make more disciples. Because in order to fulfill the Great Commission fully, you have to teach them how to make more disciples. Does that make sense? Okay? So even in the Great Commission, what we find is that we can't fulfill the Great Commission without multiplication. Without teaching our students and teaching our people how to make disciples for themselves, who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. Why should we multiply? Reason number one right off the bat is because God commands that we do. It's not a church strategy that's getting popular today. It's literally God's command in his word that we make and multiply disciples. Okay? Here's the second reason why I'm going to say. I'm going to go through these quickly so I can get to the actual how-to kind of stuff. The second conviction as to why we should multiply is one, God commands it. Two, society demands it. Okay? Here's what I mean by this. Houston. Anybody from Houston? You are Houston.
Originally.
Yeah.
Houston,
oh, really?
Yeah.
You were born in Houston, and your name is Houston. This is incredible. Unbelievable. Who else is from Houston? You guys from Houston? Cool. Houston right now, population of Houston is 7 million people. Okay? Okay? In 2000, that's metro, not just city. The metro area of Houston is 7 million people. In 2019, the greater Houston region was growing at a rate of 92,000 people a year. Okay? If you break that down per week, okay, 52 weeks in a year, 92,000 people in the year. Per week, Houston is growing at a rate of 1,700 people. Just Houston. Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona are doing the exact same thing. If you want to be a mega church in America, you have to have an average Sunday morning gathering of 2,000 people, okay? Which means that Phoenix, Arizona, Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, just to name a few cities, are growing at a rate of one mega church per week. You guys planting mega churches every week? Because we're not, right? That's insane. That's a ton of growth, right? And so here's a little tool that we've done with our team, okay, before. I want you to imagine that you're a church of 5,000. Congrats, you're already well into your mega church days, okay? You're a church of 5,000. I want you to imagine growing at a rate of 2,000 a week. So by year one, you're already at 104,000 people. Congrats, you're getting every book deal you can possibly think of. You're on the cover of every single Christian magazine in the world. Like in 1 year, you went from 5,000 to 104,000, growing at 2,000 a week. Now, ignore all the logistical nightmare, right? Of we need a bigger building every single week. We need more parking every single week. Ignore that. Just imagine if somehow that just worked out, okay? You're growing starting at 5,000, you're growing 2,000 every single week. In 1 year, you've already hit 104,000. The next year, you'll hit 208,000. After that, you're 306, thousand, 12, okay? You keep growing at that rate. How long do you think it will take you to reach the greater Houston area if you just keep adding to that one church every single week, 2,000 at a time?
It never will.
No, it will.
It will?
Yeah. Do you want to guess how long? No. Anyone want to take a shot in the dark?
20 years.
Huh?
20 years.
No. That'd be great.
100 years.
No, that would also be great. 100,000 years. I default to Houston's answer, it won't happen. The answer is 584 years. 584 years of growing at a rate that is a miracle. That's Pentecost happening every single week in your church. 584 years to add to that church. I want to give you the exact same scenario. Houston's growing, okay, by a mega church a week. You have a small group of 5 people, really faithful, committed people. In 1 year, that small group multiplies to another small group of just 5 people. It's just 5, okay? So after 1 year, you got double digits, son, right? Like, congrats, you're in double figures, okay? After the next year, both of those groups then create 2 more groups of 5. Now you're at 20 after year 2. Okay, year 3, okay, all 4 of those groups of 5 create 4 more groups of 5 each together, okay? Now you're at, 80 people, right? By year 4, you're at 160. You finally broke triple digits after 4 years of faithfully multiplying 5 people 1 year at a time for each group. How long do you think that group would take to reach the greater Houston region, growing at the rate it's currently growing right now? Some of you are like trying to do the math. I wouldn't even worry about it. 17? Wow, that's really optimistic, but close. 22 years. 22 years. So put this in perspective. How many of you think realistically that you can take a group of 5 people and a year from now have 10? I think I could legit do that. How many of you think that a week from now you can have 7,000 people in your 5,000 person church? And yet it would take that church of adding in a miraculous way 584 years to reach Houston. And the faithful group of 5, 22. That's our lifetime that we would see all of Houston reach with the gospel. You add a few more years to that, you would hit the entire world. If every single person and group was multiplying over and over and over again. You want to reach your campus and you want to reach your city. It's not going to happen by you trying to be a marginally bigger. It's going to happen by raising up leaders who know how to make and multiply disciples. It's God's plan. It's not a church church growth strategy that we created. God created it, and He gave us that plan. He literally said, "You make disciples," and then what does He say? "I'll build the church." Sometimes we take on what Christ's role is for ourselves, don't we? Where we say, my role is to build the church, right? And it's not our role. That's Jesus' role to build the church. What's our role? To be faithful to make and multiply disciples. That's our role, okay? So, first 2 reasons of why we should multiply, okay? Hope you're seeing this. God commands it. Second one is society demands it. And then the third one I'll give you is that culture needs it. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. I think the era of Christendom is essentially over in America. Here's what I mean by Christendom. I mean the time in our culture where it was culturally normal to be a part of a church, okay? And to be engaged in church. That era of our society is coming to an end. Our city is the 16th most post-Christian city in America. I have lived in Tucson for only 4 to 5 months. I have met dozens of people in our neighborhood. I have yet to meet a single Christian in our neighborhood. Doesn't mean that they don't exist. I think they do, but I haven't met them yet, okay? We're entering into an era, especially outside the state of Texas, where our society is becoming culturally more and more post-Christian. And so the question is always like this to ask, how do you get people that want nothing to do with the church engaged with the church? Here's what you're not going to do. It's not going to be by having the best worship gathering. They don't care how great your band is. They don't care how great your sermons are. They don't really want to listen to them. What's going to reach them is organic relationships, life on life, making disciples with these people in neighborhoods and in homes. Okay? That's where we need to focus a lot of our attention. Okay? So the first thing you need, if you're going to shift from addition to multiplication, you and your team needs a deep, deep, deep conviction that multiplication is not just an option for the church, it is the option for the church, okay? And the reason why is because God commands it, society demands it, and that culture needs it. Culture needs us to engage them where they are, okay? Now, that's conviction, okay? That's got to be present in you and in your team. It's not going to go very far, okay? If you don't have a deep conviction for something, it's just not going to take you far just in general in life, no matter what it might be, okay? Let me give you an example. I know that vegetables are good for me. Okay, that's a pretty obvious fact. If you were to ask my wife, who is here, not in this room, but she didn't want to listen to my breakout, which is fine. If you were to ask my wife, and I'll tell you right now, I eat 0 vegetables. I eat like a child. Every person I know makes fun of me that's an adult, okay? I eat like chicken nuggets and french fries and hamburgers with just meat and cheese. Like, get rid of the vegetables, man. I don't want that, okay? I want potatoes, I want corn. Those are the only 2 vegetables. You're like, those are starches. No, let me have these, all right? But I don't like vegetables, okay? And I don't eat them. I know in my head that they're good for me and that I should, but it's not a deep-seated conviction in my heart that I really need to do this. And because it's not a deep-seated conviction, it has not taken root in my life, okay? If you want to lead your ministry this way, you have to have a deep, deep, deep conviction that this is the way to move your church forward and to move your ministry forward, okay? And your team has to have it too. I cannot stress that enough, okay? You won't get very far without conviction. Second thing, let's keep going, is culture, okay? You need to have the right culture in order to create and make and multiply disciples. Here's what I mean by culture. By culture, what I mean is the right environment in which disciple making can flourish, okay? Think of, like, if you're a gardener or a planter or whatever, and you want to plant something, right? You got to have the right environment for that thing, for that, let's say, vegetable or whatever, that flower to grow and blossom, right? In order to have the right environment, you got to have the right soil, you got to have sunlight, you got to have water, all those things create the right environment for these kind of things to grow, okay? We just moved to a desert. Not a lot grows in the desert, okay? We tried to grow grass this entire time we've lived there, because it is possible, but you got to water it like crazy. So I mean, we dug out like our front lawn. We put in like all this new pipe to have these sprinkler systems. We laid down grass and all this kind of stuff. You want to guess how much grass we've grown? None. Man, it sucks, right? And the reason why is because we're not very good at creating the right environment for that grass to grow. My neighbor down the corner has beautiful grass, because they have an automatic system that waters their lawn every single time. We don't, so we have to remember to turn it on. We don't always remember to turn it on. So the sun scorches it anytime it tries to pop up, because we're just not consistent. We can create the right environment for grass to grow. We have not created the right environment for grass to grow. Make sense? If you're going to have a multiplying ministry, you need to create the right environment, the right culture that feeds the right kind of nutrients, the right kind of soil, the right kind of air. All those things have to be set just right for disciple making to take root and ultimately to flourish, okay? And so what is the right culture? And with that, how do you create culture, okay? Let me give you this first. Here's what I think is the right culture for disciple making to flourish, okay? It looks a lot like a family. Not a dysfunctional family. Maybe that's the image you get in your head. Maybe you didn't come from a super healthy family. Maybe it was more dysfunctional. A healthy family. Disciple making flourishes and takes root in ministries where we have a healthy culture that resembles and reflects a family. Okay? Now, I don't have a whiteboard. And I totally botched that, so this is my bad. But I want you to imagine in your mind, or maybe you can draw it on your notepad if you're taking notes or whatever. But imagine two lines, one vertical, one horizontal, that cross right at the middle, creating 4 quadrants in all 4 areas, okay? The vertical line is this idea of play, okay? If you go up on the vertical line, it would be high play, okay? Lots of relationships, a lot of fun, okay? If you were to go down on the vertical axis, it'd be low play. Not a lot of fun, not a lot of relational equity, okay? The horizontal axis represents purpose, okay? On the right side of that horizontal line would be high purpose, okay? This is clear vision, clear mission, high purpose. On the left side of the line would be low purpose, okay? Lack of vision, all those kind of things. That quadrant creates, or those 2 lines create 4 quadrants that we can easily find ourselves when it comes to the current culture of our church in regards to what it looks like in regards to family. If you have high play and low purpose, okay? So the top left quadrant, if you're drawing it, okay? I hope this is working out on your sheet. Like, it would be great. But that top left quadrant, high play, low purpose, here's how we would classify that. We would classify that as kindergarten, okay? It's all fun. It's high relational equity, super great, but there's low purpose. There's little challenge. There's little vision. There's little encouragement kind of pushing people forward to make and multiply disciples. This is the quadrant where I think 90% of churches in America are right now. High play, low purpose. Okay? All it is let's have a relationship, let's have fun, let's keep you coming back, but we're not going to challenge you to share your faith. We're not going to challenge you to make disciples, and we may not even challenge you to overcome that sin of yours. If we can teach you that, that'd be great, okay? But we're not really giving them a whole bunch of challenge. We're just trying to entertain them and keep them engaged as long as humanly possible. Make sense? A lot of play, a little bit of purpose. Okay? The bottom left quadrant, low play, low purpose, this is just boring, okay? No one wants to be in this. No, there's no good, fun relationships. There's no purpose in life. It's just like, why on earth do we even exist, okay? No one should be in that quadrant, okay? If you're in that quadrant, we should talk, okay? Because, man, that's a bummer. The bottom right quadrant, high purpose, low play, we call that staff. You're creating a staff culture, okay? This is everyone's anxious. This defined by anxiety. There's a lot of work, a lot of energy. People are probably getting burned out because there's so much stuff to do, but little relational equity that's keeping people afloat and alive, and the tasks being enjoyable, okay? You can do something as boring as painting a wall with the right people, and it's the best time of your life, okay? Painting sucks, all right? Let's just be on the same page. Painting's the worst, okay? You can paint a wall with the right people, and it's the greatest 3 hours of your life. You can go to Disney World with the wrong people, and it's the worst thing ever. Right? Everyone's fighting. You just want to run away. You're like, please put me back on Space Mountain so I don't have to talk to somebody for a minute, right? People and relationships matter, right? So if it's high purpose and very little play, then we find ourselves in a staff culture where everyone's stressed, everyone's anxious, and it's all defined by work, and it's not defined by relationships, and it's not defined by fun. The top right quadrant, the perfect balance of high play and high purpose, is what we call a family. Healthy families have the right balance of purpose and play. Okay? I have 4 kids. We fostered and adopted all of our kids. They're all from one family, biological family. Our house is just nuts and bananas, like every single day. People are like, what's your house like? I'm like, it's like an alarm going off every 2 seconds. That's what it sounds like and it feels like. There's always an emergency and it's loud, okay? For me to be a good dad, I need to have the right balance with my kids of play and purpose. I want you to imagine for a moment, and maybe you don't have to imagine because maybe this is the house that you grew up in. I want you to imagine growing up in a house where it's high play and low purpose. We're in that kindergarten section. If you grow up in a house like that, what we often see is that when you grow up, it can very easily happen to where you grow up into a place where a lot of those kind of people grow up to feel self-entitled. They can grow up to be a little bratty, okay? And the reason why is because anytime they asked for anything, there was no challenge or pushback. It just happened, right? It was just given to them because there's little challenge, little purpose, a lot of relational equity and play. Mom and dad don't want to be the bad guys, so every time you ask for ice cream or whatever, you get it. That's not a healthy environment for a kid to grow up in. It's not. My kids have friends that are in that environment, okay? They're crazy, all right? It's not a healthy environment for a kid to grow up in. The opposite is also true. High purpose, low play, defined by anxiety, the staff kind of area. Imagine growing up as a kid in that quadrant. If you grow up as a kid in that quadrant, oftentimes what's going to happen is you might get to the place where you feel like love is not something that's freely given, but love is something that is earned. Because the only time you heard that your parents were proud of you is whenever you did enough good things, because the culture of your home was defined by work and not play. Healthy homes have the right balance between play and purpose. Okay? It's challenging kids to be all who Christ created them to be and recreating them to be, and at the same time, having a lot of fun and play with them to where they know without a doubt my dad and my mom love me and care about me because the relationship's there. That makes sense? Disciple making flourishes in an environment where it's the right combination between purpose and play. And so when we talk about making disciples and leading our ministry towards multiplication, here's what usually happens in our mind when we start making that shift. We think, what do we need to train our people in, right? We need to train them in evangelism. We need to train them in discipleship. We need to train them in a variety of things to be able to go and make disciples, right? I don't know if you've ever met someone who's just naturally making disciples, but I have never met anyone that just naturally makes disciples, okay? Most of the time, our people need a lot of training and a lot of equipping and a lot of accountability to go and make disciples. And so what happens is that a lot of times when we shift from addition to multiplication, we add a lot of training and add a lot of equipping into the culture. But what does that do? If we're hanging out in kindergarten and we add all these things, we think it's just going to shift us over to family. But what happens is it actually shifts us down to stress. Because we need to make sure that with every equipping thing that we add a time of play. Okay? Here's one of the things that we did in our college ministry that was a game changer. Feel free to steal it if you want. Okay? We started to think, because we started realizing a lot of our students are stressed. We keep encouraging them, training them, equipping them to make disciples. A lot of them are living in the stress bubble. Okay? Here's what we did. We did one thing. We added a gathering on Sunday nights that was optional just for our leaders that we called family nights. That's it. We called it family nights. Here's what we did. We hung out, we ate dinner. That's it, okay? Occasionally we would play a board game. Sometimes they would stay over and watch a movie, okay? The rule was you come over to my house, we're gonna act like a family, which means that I'm not the one cooking dinner every single week. You are in college and you are old enough to pitch in and help, okay? So we're gonna rotate who helps cook. Everyone's gonna help clean. We're gonna share the financial burden of this thing. And we made it not a requirement. We made it optional for students to come to this thing, for leaders to come to this thing. Let me tell you, we made some things in the past required to come to. Half our team would show up. We made this thing not required and it was just a time of play so that it could balance the high purpose times. Every week, every single leader showed up. We would cook. Our house was never cleaner, parents. Our house was never cleaner in the week than after Sunday nights because we had a team of 15 to 20 college students cleaning up our home. Not only that, but my kids get to play with college students every single Sunday. They love Sunday nights. We get home from church, my kids start cleaning the house because they know that college students are coming over and they can't wait. And they'll get blankets, college students will get blankets and pull my kids like a train behind them. We're having the most fun. We're not doing anything but playing and hanging out with each other. Occasionally we play board games. One night they're like, can we watch a movie? And I'm like, sure, you can stay here as long as you want. I mean, at some point I'll probably kick you out. You know, you can't stay for forever, but like, yeah. And so they would just come and hang and play. And you know what happened? Our trainings and our equipping times became so much richer, so much more impactful because they were balanced out with this time of just play. If we're going to have a multiplying impact, we got to create the right culture. And the right culture includes the right balance between purpose and play. We need to make our teams feel like a family that's going to launch us into a culture of multiplication. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, another thing about culture, okay, real quick, and then we're going to move on to constructs. Constructs is like the tools of how we move people this direction. One more thing about culture. If we're going to create culture, one of the greatest tools that you can leverage in your pocket is the culture of language, okay? Put it this way, words create worlds, okay? Words create worlds. Language is one of the greatest tools that we have in order to create the culture that we want, okay? Which means, okay, if we're going to create this multiplying culture, we need to ask ourselves, what are we talking about? What's the language that we use? How frequently do we use it? And evaluate what might need to be changed about our regular culture. Because here's the thing, what we talk about is what we value, okay? So if we want to go from addition to multiplication, but our entire conversations are about how many more people we're getting on our weekly gathering, we have the desire for multiplication culture, but we're actually talking addition culture. Makes sense? So we need to change what we talk about. We also need to change how we talk about it. Now, with that in mind, it's not a bad thing to talk about how many people come to your gathering or to your group. I think you should measure those things. Some people are like, you shouldn't measure those things, right? And I'm like, I think you should. But here's how I think you should measure them. You should measure them the right way. A lot of time we measure how many people are coming to our ministry so that we can define success. That's not success. That is potential. Okay? We calculate how many people are coming to our ministries as if that is the success marker. It's not the success marker, it's the potential marker, because all of those people are future disciple makers that can multiply the gospel somewhere. Okay? And so instead of saying, we have 100 people to our ministry, yippee, right? We're killing it. There's a big difference between that and saying we have 100 people that we can multiply as disciple makers. Those are two big mentality shifts. So sometimes it means we need to start talking about different things. Sometimes it means we need to change how we talk about the same thing. You can talk about numbers if you want. Make sure you talk about them in light of potential and input into your ministry and not the success and output of your ministry. Understand? Does that make sense? Now, another thing too with that is we need to change our wins, what we classify as a win and really what we celebrate. Okay? Let me give you a few things that I think are better markers of things that we should classify as wins and what we should celebrate. Okay? So for example, instead of just calculating the number of people that have come into your gathering, what if these were what you kind of tallied? What if the wins looks like something like this? The number of lost people that consider us trusted friends. Not acquaintances, but friends that they could/would go in times of need. How many of us in our ministry are calculating that number? I know as a college pastor, I never calculated that number. That's a multiplying calculation. The number of lost people that consider us trusted friends. Or what about this? The number of significant conversations we're having with lost people about their deeper stories. How often are we celebrating that, right? I remember seeing a college ministry one time that had this big grid. And every time someone had a gospel conversation, they would write their name, who they had it with, and the date in one of the quadrants on this massive grid. And the reason they did that is because they just wanted to see how many gospel conversations are happening every single week. And how many over the course of a semester are happening? And who's it happening with? And how frequently is it happening with those same people? Okay. Here's another one. The number of times throughout the month that our group community is providing physical, relational, emotional, or spiritual help to the lost around us. Okay. Those are the things that I think if we want to be a multiplying ministry, we got to change our language and we got to start calculating our quote unquote success in light of things like that and not in light of just the number of people that we have. The number of people you have in your ministry is the input. It's not the output. Okay. The output are those kind of things. Number of gospel conversations, number of connections that we have with lost people, those kind of things. Okay. Words create worlds. All right. And so if we're going to create a multiplying ministry, go from addition to multiplication, we got to have deep convictions. We got to create and form the right culture so that multiplication can take root and flourish. And then lastly, we need the right constructs. Okay? Constructs are the strategies and the methods that we implement in order to move our ministry in this direction. That's what a construct is, okay? Now, quick word of warning. Constructs, I would not worry about putting in a ton of constructs. The most important thing right now for you is culture, okay? There's an old saying that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's 100% true. If you have the right strategy and the wrong culture, you're not going to move anything forward. The goal in the beginning is getting the culture right. Okay? That being said, a lot of times you need constructs in order to move the culture forward. Okay? Now, what do these constructs look like? Let me give you kind of two things that work in tandem together. You need to define your destination, and then you also need to define your vehicle. The vehicle is how you get people from where you are to that destination. But you got to define the destination first. Otherwise, you have no idea where on earth you're going. Okay? If I don't put in my phone like the destination of where we're headed and I don't know where we're going, we're not going to get there. Okay? So you need to know the destination. So what is the destination? The destination is to multiply disciples. And so here's the first question I would ask, okay, as you get things started. First question I would ask is this: what is a biblical disciple? Okay? I would have you and your team answer that question first. What is a biblical disciple? Because that's the destination for every single person in your ministry, to be a multiplying, reproducing biblical disciple. So ask yourself, what are the things that make up a disciple? What does a disciple think like? What does a disciple feel like? What does a disciple do? You know, all those are really good questions to help understand what is a biblical disciple, because that's the destination. The vehicle is how we get people from where we currently are to that destination, okay? And whenever you create your vehicle, a lot of times vehicles typically look like small groups or Bible studies, but with the culture that you're trying to reproduce deeply embedded inside of it, okay? And so when we think about vehicles, here's some things that we need to keep in mind. They need to be reproducible, which means that it shouldn't be something super complicated. It should be something really simple, really easy, so that we can hand off to somebody else and they can reproduce it and lead it for themselves, okay? Simple and reproducible, that's number one. The second thing is they need to be missional, okay? If all we're doing is multiplying Bible studies for Christians, that's great. But remember, the Great Commission is evangelism and discipleship. Okay? We have to do both. We can't just lean on one side or the other. Okay? So they have to be missional, which means they have to have a missional frontier, a missional target, a mission field. The third thing they need to have is they need to be cultural. Okay? Meaning that they need to have the culture that you want to replicate deeply ingrained inside of it to carry it wherever it is that you're going. Okay? And so crafting that vehicle to get people from where you are to where they're headed is really important. Let me give you the example vehicle that we currently use in our church. Okay, by currently use, I put that in quotes mainly because we're not really a church yet. We've been there for 4 months. The vehicle that we will be using very shortly in our church, and the one that we used when we were in college ministry. Okay, we call our vehicle 242. Okay, that's what we call it. We call it that because no one else has called it that. And that allows us to create language that is unique to us, and because language creates culture, we uniquely call it something unique. Okay, we call it 242s off of Acts 2:42, which says they dedicated themselves to prayer, fellowship, and the apostles' teachings, which we now know as the New Testament. So it's prayer, fellowship, and the Word of God. As an overflow of this inward dedication to those three things, God multiplies them across the city of Jerusalem. Okay? I don't believe that there's an Acts 2:47, which is God added to the number daily, those being saved, without an Acts 2:42 of this inward devotion. So some of the language that we use in our church is that we believe that inward devotion leads to outward multiplication. Okay? That's a conviction that we believe. Okay? 242s are meant to embody the idea and the spirit of Acts 2:42. Okay? And so what do? Well, if you look at Acts 2:42 through 2:47, the early church is engaged in three different directions. They're dedicated upwardly with their relationship with God, okay, through prayer, through the apostles' teaching. They're dedicated upwardly with their relationship with God. They're dedicated inwardly with the other believers. They're dedicated to the fellowship of the saints. And they're dedicated outwardly to the missional frontier, right? That there are people outside of the church that they are having favor with, that they are sharing the gospel with, that are putting their faith in Jesus. So we would say that there's three directions, up, in, and out, that they're dedicated to. Our 242s are dedicated in all three of those directions. So here's what that looks like for us. Every single week, our 242s gather together for Bible studies. Why? Because that's an upward direction where we can nurture our upward relationship with Jesus. Every month or 2 months, our 242s have a night of prayer where they come together to seek the Lord in intimacy and in intercession on behalf of their neighborhood and their missional frontier. Okay? Those are upward rhythms. Inward rhythms look like organized and organic times together. Okay? So it might be, hey, put it on your schedule. We're all going to the movies this day. Or it might be, hey, last minute, you want to come over for dinner. Okay? It's organic and organized times together. It's a balance between play and purpose. It looks like a family. Okay? Our outward times look like service projects, dinner parties at our house where we invite every unbeliever we can possibly think of to come hang out at our house and we can enjoy each other and have conversations and all those kind of things, right? Constant rhythms of up, in, and out. Why? Because that's the kind of culture that we want our people to be. We believe that a true biblical disciple has all three of those relationships and they all need to be perfectly balanced with each other. And so our groups help nurture that kind of rhythm by having those same three directional rhythms. That makes sense? And so all of our 242s are led by a leadership team with a distinct mission field with that kind of culture of up, in, and out. Another way to put that would be abide, family, and mission. That we want to be an abiding family on mission together is the full sentence that we would use. And then every single 242, the goal is to multiply to a new missional frontier, to raise up new leaders and disciple new leaders so that they can take the gospel to another place that they feel like God's calling them to take it to. Maybe it's their neighborhood, or maybe it's a people group, or maybe it's a workplace, or whatever it might be. That is the vehicle that we crafted to carry the culture being for us an abiding missional family, into every single neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. And so we want to define what does a disciple look like. In our case, it's up, in, and out rhythms. And then the vehicle helps move people from where they are to where that destination of where you're wanting to lead them. Okay? So, getting started. Okay, last thing. Here is what I would recommend to get started moving in this direction with your ministry. Okay? The first thing is this. After you have your deep convictions and your leadership team has the same convictions with you, okay? First thing I would do is determine your destination. And by determining your destination, what is a clear language that you want to use as to where we're going and where we're moving everybody? For us, it's real simple. We are an abiding missional family. Boom, 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 okay? Where are you going and what's that language look like? Next thing, craft a vehicle to help get you there, okay? Create some sort of group or something that helps going to take people from where they are to where they can be part of the abiding missional family, okay? The third thing I would do is I would start small, okay? You got your destination, you got your vehicle to get there. What I would do is I would only put a few people in the car, okay? Your top leaders. I would bring them into the vehicle, into what we would call a 242, and I would model that for them and lead them through that for a while. Because they need to learn it for themselves and get it. And one of the best ways to learn it is to be immersed in the culture and to be able to imitate something that you see. We learn best not through like a lecture setting like this. We learn best when we are immersed in a culture to where we can imitate that somewhere down the road. Makes sense? And so I would put them in with me. I lead the group, and I would lead the group for 6 to 8 months so they can get deeply immersed in it. They can see it for themselves. They get a taste for it. And then after taking a small group of your highest level leaders that can really get this and that would really gravitate towards this kind of culture and DNA, then after 6 to 8 months of putting them inside that vehicle, then I would multiply them. And here's the thing, I would multiply them slowly. Okay? Don't be like, all right, we're going to take 12 people. We're all going to put them in this vehicle. And after 6 to 8 months, we're going to have 12 groups where they all lead their own group. Don't do that. Okay? You can put 12 people in the vehicle if you want, but I would only multiply to like 2 more groups. Okay? Maybe 3. And here's the reason why. You want to make sure you don't multiply too wide so that you can keep good tabs on your leaders to make sure that the culture is still being embedded in the next group that's going forward. Okay? And so for us, we're about to start our first 242 in Tucson. We're going to do that for 6 to 8 months. Okay? Hopefully by next March, we'll multiply, and we're going to multiply to 2 additional groups at best, maybe 3. Okay? And we're going to do that intentionally on purpose. And those 2 to 3 people are people that are literally on my staff for the most part, so that I can keep close eyes and tabs on the culture that's being developed inside of those groups. You don't want to multiply too wide too fast. Okay? Otherwise, the culture you're trying to build, all of a sudden it's all over the place. Okay? So that's what I would do to get started. Define your destination, craft your vehicle, get a small group of committed, all-in people in that vehicle, walk them through it, and then when you feel like they're ready, then you get them to go multiply and reproduce the same thing. And they're able to reproduce it because they saw it, they've seen you do it. Okay? They were immersed in it, and now they can imitate it for themselves. All right, so 3 things, like I said, again, of how we're going to go from addition to multiplication. Conviction, you need the right culture, you need the right constructs, the right vehicle to take us from where we are to the destination that we want to have, okay? We are just about out of time. We have about 10 more minutes, but I wanted to open it up to any kind of questions, thoughts, or anything like that before we break. And I think we have one more break out before we're done for the day. So, any other thoughts, questions on what this looks like? Yeah.
So last summer we started home groups as our college ministry, and I think that implementing the culture is something that we've struggled with. Would you recommend? I don't want to say scrapping, but how do I just put the culture into this? Because I believe in this as a good vehicle, and I think that it accomplishes the up and the inward. We're struggling a little bit on the outward portion of it. So is it just a leaders meeting? Because I trust the people leading it in their spiritual maturity.
How many groups do you have?
Right now, just 2.
Okay. How big are those groups?
8 to 10 people per group.
Okay.
So it'd be a really large single home group.
Yeah.
And that'd make it hard, but there's not a ton of groups.
None of those people have kids, right? This is all college?
Right.
Here would be my encouragement. I would say go big group. Okay? Our groups in Tucson, here's what we're hoping. We're hoping that they're in between 20 to 50 people. Okay? We're not shooting for 12 to 15, and let me give you a reason why. A couple reasons. One, I think that bigger groups create a larger, here's the reason why your out might be struggling. It might literally have to do with how small your groups are. If I'm an unbeliever coming to your 8-person group, I am immediately thrusted into intimacy. I can't hide in an 8-person group. Okay? 20 people, I can sit on the outside of the group, I can watch and I can observe, and I can slowly move in and in and in towards intimacy as I feel led. That's a great place for an unbeliever. So I would think about that. What does your culture currently in your group look like? And is it a hindrance for someone who's not a believer? So I think that one, a larger group is more inviting for an unbeliever because they can hide in the background. That makes sense? You can always, if you have 20 people or 30 people, you can always take it like one big group and then split into smaller subgroups in the night if you want, okay? It depends on your house and all the resources that you have. But I'm for big groups. Here's another reason I'm for big groups, okay? Bigger groups have more of more resources to pull from to make more of an impact in their community and in their mission field. When you have 8 people and you do a service project, for example, most likely half your people are going to show up. There's only so many people you can do with 4 people. You got 30 and half of them show up, you got 15 people. That's pretty killer. Okay. Also, if you want to throw a dinner party for unbelievers to come in and only 4 people from your group show up and then like 6 unbelievers show up, now you're outnumbered and you can't control the culture anymore. Okay. But if you got 15 people, you already got a critical mass. Now it feels like a dinner party, and this is a fun thing to be a part of. Christians aren't the lame people that no one comes to. Now it's like, this is what's up. Okay. So you have more resources to pull from in bigger groups when you have bigger groups and you do outreach events. The third reason is that bigger groups, I think, let you multiply better. Here's the hard thing about multiplying a group that's 8, okay? In order to multiply that, someone from your group has to leave their friends and go start something else. You multiply a group of 30, that person who wants to go multiply can leave and take their friends with them without hindering the group they're leaving, which means that now they already have people in their corner and they already have a team they can go multiply with. So my advice is I would go big. That'd be my encouragement. I would almost put all those people together. I would have you lead it so that you can craft and create the culture and model that for your people and then have them go and replicate that group. And I would really encourage you, you don't have to, but I would encourage you to consider going bigger groups. Yeah. But that's a good question. Any other thoughts or questions?
This is really good. It's a lot to take in. It gives a lot of content. But thank you.
Yeah. This process is a long process, okay? We shifted our college ministry from addition to multiplication, and it took us a solid 2 years, maybe at best a year and a half, before we felt like everybody was really on board. And even at that point, not everybody was on board. It's just really, really tricky, okay? And so give yourself some space and some time. There is no way in the world that we can cover this in the detail that we need in an hour-long session. A few resources that I would give you if you want to take it further, there's really only one phenomenal resource that we've had over the course of time, is there's a group, the guys here, called Elementum. Are you with Elementum?
No.
Oh, you should be. Yeah. There's a group called Elementum, okay? Their leader is a guy named Andy Abramson. He's a phenomenal friend. He helped us tremendously, but here's what they do. They coach you along the way. So instead of just giving you like a one lecture and then releasing you to try all the things of creating culture and constructs, which is a lot, they walk you through every step in the process, which is really, really helpful. So and it's one-on-one coaching. It's not like you're thrown into a classroom. It's like him or his staff is there with you, coaching you through this, and then every time you meet, you're taking next steps towards creating this culture. And so if you would like, I can get you in contact with Andy and at least just learn more about what they do. But that's a phenomenal resource in order to help create this culture over the course of time in your ministry, because it does take a long season of period of time. But if you can get it, you can multiply like crazy. Okay, and that's the thing, is you are sacrificing fast growth for long-term multiplication. It's a good sacrifice, okay? It's a worthwhile sacrifice. Our church is not going to be in the top 100 fastest growing churches. We might be, by the grace of God, one of the best multiplying churches in the city of Tucson. I'd much rather be known for that, so. But if you want to learn more from Andy, talk to me after, and I can give you his number and try to get you in contact with him. He has been a really helpful resource. But yeah, I know it's a lot. Mitch was like, can you talk about how to shift? And I'm like, oh boy. 1 hour for a year and a half of work. Let's do it. Yeah. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, very practically, I have a very small house. So is it literally just...
One, I think you'd be surprised how many people you can fit in your house. Make sure people carpool, because cars is a situation. And then I would just ask, is there someone that you know in the church that maybe has a bigger space that could open it up? But that'd be my encouragement. And you don't have to go that route. You can try to get your leaders together more often and try to ingrain this more. But man, if you really want them to see it and get it, I think they're going to have to watch you do it. Yeah. Also, with that, if you don't have relationships with unbelievers and you're expecting your students to, they're not. They're not until you do. Okay? So if you don't have a relationship with an unbeliever, that's where you should really start. Go out, find someone, I don't know, not knock on your neighbor's door, that'd be weird. But find some people that aren't believers, get in a relationship with them, start sharing the gospel with them. That's going to be your greatest tool to teach them how to evangelize, is by you doing it and by them seeing it. Okay? So start there too. If you don't have those, that's where I would start as well. So, any other questions before we end? All right, let me pray for you. And then, man, we finished a whole minute before. Incredible. Impeccable timing, I'd say. That's the word I would use to describe it. Wouldn't you? Impeccable. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Houston. All right, let me pray. Lord, I'm just so thankful. God, you are so good and so holy. God, I just pray over these leaders. God, I pray that you would give them deep conviction and the right just mentality to take your gospel and multiply it, God, across their campuses, across their cities. And they would raise up disciple makers and leaders. And so, God, be with them. God, use them in ways that they never even would even consider to be possible. We love you, Jesus. We praise your name. Amen.